Welcome to Small Biz Life, episode 67, Thriving Through Peak Season.
Does this sound familiar?
Oh my God, I have so much to do today.
Don't forget to breathe.
But I have almost 400 emails in my inbox and 30 phone calls to make.
Have you looked into getting a virtual assistant yet?
Oh, and I need to schedule all my social media posts.
Did you drink anything today?
I had coffee.
Did you eat today?
Did I mention coffee's a bean?
This is Small Biz Life.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Small Biz Life. My name's Kristen Ingram.
And I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And we are a husband and wife team of small business owners. I'm a CPA.
And I'm an IT professional.
And we are walking with you through this journey that we call the Small Biz Life.
That's right. You know, we sit around and help you with all of the tough stuff that will give you more time to focus on doing the work of your business and less time working for your business.
Exactly. So actually this week, we are starting to ramp up for my peak season.
Woo.
And so we thought it would be a good idea to kind of talk about how to survive and thrive during peak season and, you know, the planning that goes into that, because you can't really jump in to peak season. It's got to be something that hopefully you do a little bit of planning for and, you know, to help kind of get you through that.
Yeah, you know, and really, I think we need to take a moment to identify what we mean by peak season. That's a term that means a lot to us because of my time at UPS. They would always call it peak season. I don't know if everyone calls their busy season peak season, but it's really those times that you get busy. And I think most industries probably have a peak season, at least to a bit. But definitely, if you create products, you should be creating your own peak seasons whenever that happens. If you're in the middle of running your business and there's no times of the year that you feel anxiety and deadline pressure, you're probably not trying to grow your business. And you might be doing fine now, but later on that could come back to haunt you.
Well, some industries have a natural peak season. So being a tax accountant, my peak season is January through April 15th. A lot of you are retailers.
Yeah.
Or you're selling to consumers. So you've got a natural peak season now, right? And you're probably actually hopefully getting to the end of your peak season. But Jeff's right. You know, if you don't have a natural peak season, then you need to create one. And this is typically when you're doing major launches or when you're really pushing a product or service to try to ramp up your sales. You are generating your own peak season. And so these techniques would still apply to you as you're going into a launch or you are pushing a brand new product. So, you know, this really applies to everybody. Even like, I know some of you are gearing up for January, you're launching new websites, you're launching new products. So this applies to you as well because you are doing a self-generated peak.
You know, and and this is one of the reasons why we always push planning. Some people think that we're not very spontaneous because we're talking about planning and goals. The reason we plan is so we can be present in the moment in our business as well. We talk a lot of times about presence in life. You need presence in your business to do the operational side of things. We're not a fan of selling, so when we're trying to sell, we need to be focused on that. And the other parts of the business can be distractions that will help prevent you from doing the important tasks that need to happen in those peaks.
So, you know, one thing is funny because I was actually talking about this with my business coach. And yes, I have a business coach. It was kind of funny because we were kind of talking about how I sometimes feel like I am unregimented in this part of the business. And so we started talking about tax season because she knows that this is coming up for me. I am incredibly proactive during tax season. And we were kind of talking, you know, after we had that discussion about how we need to bring that proactiveness into the other side of the, the consulting business and the small biz life side of things. So, I thought it was a really good time for us to kind of have this, discussion, even though I know a lot of you are actually coming out of your peak season.
Mm-hmm.
It's still, a good time for us to kind of think about maybe how you can alter your peak season or how you can possibly generate additional peaks in your year.
Yeah. Well, I think the most important thing is knowing your industry, knowing when those peaks do naturally occur. If there are peaks, and you're not involved in them, you have to ask yourself, why not?
Okay, so let's talk about peaks for a couple different industries. So if you are in retail, then clearly your peak season is the fall leading up to the holidays.
I wonder if that's true for restaurants as well. I've never researched that, but you have to imagine if more people are out shopping, there's probably more people eating out as well. I don't know.
So restaurants do really well this period of time. Restaurants also do fairly well when the warm weather starts because people have been cooped up for so long that they want to get out. If you have a delivery-based company, so like if you're a restaurant that offers delivery, then your peak is when it's really cold. And then things like the Super Bowl and things like that are, people have a lot delivered during that time period. But it's kind of funny because depending on how your restaurant is structured, when it gets really cold, people don't want to go out. They don't want to buy groceries. And so they order a lot more delivery. So it's kind of interesting. So if you're in that, retail restaurants, this is a pretty busy time for you. If you do anything with either children or electronics, back to school time is also a busy time for you. So if you're in that kind of field, then you have a really long, busy season because you've got the back to school and then it goes dead for about a month. And then now you're gearing up for the holidays. Yeah. If you are in like either HVAC or plumbing repair, things like that, then your peak is going for HVAC, it's going to be as it gets colder. And then when it gets really cold and when it gets really hot. Yeah. Because that's the time when people are like, oh no, I need to get my air conditioning fixed or I need to get my heating fixed.
Or it's when they realize it's broken.
Right. So, if you're in landscaping, the fall is typically a very busy time for you because while you have your normal, mowing services, people will hire you to do either spring cleanups or fall cleanups.
Or both.
Right. Or both. It might not necessarily be a weekly customer for you. If you're doing more on the landscape design, then spring is real busy for you because, as things start coming back to life, people start thinking about how their yard looks. If you are in repair, it's kind of tough because it really depends on when people's things break. However, if you're also on the maintenance side of things, so if you're in tech, then, if you're serving consumers, the back to school time is a good time to have a push. If you're working with businesses, a lot of businesses are trying to make their final expense purchases towards the end of the year. So you kind of have this window between like the beginning of November and the middle of December. Once you kind of get past that point, people are, they're no longer thinking about those upgrades unless you can get them the week before Christmas and New Year, between Christmas and New Year.
Well, another actual mini peak times for tech people are when major updates come out for existing operating systems. A lot of times things will stop working for people.
Right. So, if you are doing a lot of service for Microsoft-based products and Microsoft has a major update, or if a operating system stops being supported, that's a really good time for you to generate a peak, right? Because people are going to need your help upgrading. So, kind of think about your industry, know your ideal customer. If you haven't listened to that episode, go back to episode 4 and listen to that. We'll link all these episodes in the show notes because we're going to talk about a couple as we go through this. But know who your ideal customer is and then think about, okay, what are their needs and when is a good time to try to sell to them? Okay, because that's really key, is identifying what their needs are and, know what their peak seasons are.
Mhm.
I've said this before on the show. It's so funny now because I teach and because I have, the CPA firm, I have vendors on the teaching side that are contacting me during finals.
Mm-hmm.
And I typically write back to them and say, hi, you're contacting professors during finals week. Stop it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I get during tax season that I have software vendors for accountants that are trying to get a hold of me in, March.
They want you to switch software or try out a new service they have for you. Not the time.
Not the time.
And, for those people who provide online services where you're constantly doing big upgrades, during peak seasons are probably not the time to do it.
Yes. So, again, it's all about knowing who your ideal customer is and knowing what their peaks are, because you can turn off a customer really quickly if you try to sell to them during their peak season.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that I love about the vendor that I use for my tax software is after tax season's over, they contact me because they know that we've just all made, a large amount of our budget for the year. And they give steep discounts if you repurchase next year's software by I think it's May 15th.
Mm-hmm.
And so, their sales strategy of saying, hi, we know tax season's over. If you'd like to get your software for next year, now is a good time to do it. And now I know, I don't have to worry about that because I paid for my tax software at the end of April and I'm all set and I'm ready to go for this year. So, kind of think about those things when you're dealing with your customers. Know your peak and their peak.
Yeah. All right. Now, beyond that, let's get a bit more specific into planning. So the first thing, I think that is probably the easiest to knock out before you get into peak is what's your marketing strategy? Do you have the ads creative that you're planning to put out? Do you have the content ready? So if you deliver content as part of your outreach strategy, that it's done so you're not creating content during the middle of your busy season. I mean, I couldn't imagine, working at UPS and creating content during peak season. That would have been impossible.
Right. Or even, even during tax season, I'm not doing manual marketing. If there are any Facebook posts going out, they're pre-scheduled. If, I'm going to run a Facebook ad campaign, that's already pre-scheduled. Don't do these things while you're trying to run your business during peak. Get them all done beforehand.
That allows you to be ready. If you're going to do paid advertising like Facebook ads or stuff like that, have a couple iterations of of what you're going to use. That way, if something doesn't seem to be working out well, you can switch the color or the headline quickly to see if you get better results. But that way, you probably have a couple different images you could use to push out those kind of ads. But you don't have to think about, oh my goodness, it's not getting the response I expect or I normally get. And you have to think about it at that point because you're going to be more desperate. You're going to be more likely to create several changes to an ad at one time because you just need it to start working. And you'll end up creating a lot more stress for yourself.
Right. And, you shouldn't be trying new things during peak. Okay. You need to try those strategies before peak begins, figure out what is resonating with your audience. So that way you can have it pre-scheduled. Mm-hmm. So if you want to try some new ad strategies, try them off peak and see how they work.
Yeah.
And then that way you've done all your testing before things get busy.
The next thing to consider is temporary staffing. A scary thing for a lot of people indeed, but in many industries, impossible to get through without temporary staffing.
Yeah. So, you might want to look at, either developing a relationship with a virtual assistant, to handle some of your email inquiries or handle, traffic to your Facebook page. You can hire, high school kids or college kids, just to kind of help you out, to help you if you're shipping things to pack boxes. to help with some of those phone inquiries that you're having. There are, especially like if you're doing something, where you've got like a retail peak, there are, lots of moms that are looking for, some part-time work to make extra money for Christmas. There are lots of, you've got college kids that are home for a couple weeks before Christmas. You've got high school kids who want to make some extra money. You've just got people in general. Colleges are a great resource to get interns.
And I think a general strategy too, especially when you start getting into needing to do staffing, is keep notes of what works and what does not work. So if you go to a source and you get lousy help, don't go there again. If you wait too long and have trouble finding help, you need to remember that when you're planning for next year, not to wait so long. So one of the things to keep in mind is it's important to know the rhythm of the season. And a great way to offload that information for some people is to journal it down. So create a journal or make notes somewhere, whatever works for you. But you want to be able to understand the wins and misses during the season, not to hold yourself, but to dump it out of your brain. And then next year, as you start approaching it, you can use those notes to remind yourself of important things.
Well, and one of the reasons that it's important to have an accounting system is that you can go back and look at last year's numbers. And like in QuickBooks, I can run a revenue report by week. So I can go through and say, okay, when was I really busy during tax season? Were there lulls in tax season? Because one of the things that I do, I have a policy that the bills go out with the tax return. So if I'm looking at my revenue based on my billing, I know how much work I did every week. And so I can see, maybe there's a week in there that I can be more proactive to bring work in earlier. Or maybe there are some weeks I'm like, whoa, that was a really busy week. Let me see what I can clear off my calendar. Because my clients seem to be pretty, they're pretty reliable with when they're ready. So I can look at that and go, okay, I know what my busy weeks are going to look like, or wow, I had a lot of work that came in late. I'm going to be really proactive with those people. And I can even drill down and see who I billed in those weeks. So I can go back through and say, you know what, this person is chronically late. I am going to start sending them emails right now to remind them to start getting their paperwork together.
Yeah. I think it makes it look like a win too. If you have a reliable client who is going to show up early in your peak season and they don't, you can outreach to them, and maybe you didn't plan to, but you can then just sit there and go, wait, I haven't heard from Mary yet. I better call her. Just make sure everything's okay.
Yeah.
And even if it doesn't need to be a sell, but just to check up with your clients.
Well, and sometimes too, there are things, depending on the type of business you have, there are things that you can do outside of peak in order to make your life easier during peak. So if you know that you've got a large customer that, typically puts in an order around Thanksgiving and that order needs to be shipped by Christmas, start working with them in like July.
Yeah.
And say, okay, what can, if you get your order in now, I'll give you a small discount and we'll still get everything shipped. But what can we do to help you to get that order in earlier?
Yeah.
So, those are the kinds of things that as you're planning, right, and you have really good numbers, you can use those numbers to help make your peak season less frantic.
Now, going back for a moment to accounting systems, another reason why accounting systems are so important is, especially in an industry where you have a natural peak season, especially a big one like, say, retail, where I believe the reason traditionally Black Friday was called that wasn't because of the sales. It was because it was the first day retailers became profitable in the year, or they essentially reached the black that day. If you have a business where you have 11 months of operating in the red, you have to manage your cash flow. I think it's one of the most important things, because I think especially a novice mistake you can make is you can get caught up in this idea that, oh my gosh, my business is growing, it's growing. And I think it's not going to let down the same way it did last year. And the reason I say it's novice is because if you've been in the industry for a while, like say when I worked for UPS, I knew every year that come the day after Christmas, volume was going to drop not only to where it normally was, but lower. So we always had to plan for that eventuality. We try to encourage people to take time off at that point because we knew that we would have way too many people for the amount of work we would have. And when you can properly manage your cash flow, it will bridge the gap till that next year.
Right. And, this is one of the hardest things for seasonal businesses to deal with. And I think, a lot of online retailers, they experience this as well. It's not a complete shutdown, but you're going so hard leading up to the holidays, and then Christmas comes and things just drop off.
Mm-hmm.
Managing your cash flow through those decreased periods of revenue is critical, because if you can't bridge the gap between, through the slow period, and this happens with especially in New England with a lot of landscapers, that they're going, and they're not managing their cash reserves. And then they have a really hard time getting through the winter.
Yeah.
And so, you have to make sure, you have to know what your monthly expenses are, that you're going to have no matter what. And you have to make sure, and you need to know what kind of draws you need to take out of your business, or what kind of salary if you're an S Corp, so that you can get through those lean months. Because if you can't pay your bills, you're going to be in trouble.
Especially if you have permanent staff that are not you. Not paying a paycheck on time is a huge deal.
Right. So, it's super important to make sure that you've got that budget, what your monthly costs are, and you can get through any of those dry spells that you might have.
And just want to conceptually touch on this point a little bit. Sometimes you'll get opportunities during your peak season to have an unusually large growth. You really need to consider those kind of opportunities very judiciously, because if you don't manage it correctly, you could do a whole bunch of extra work and labor and not make any money. So I think it's important to work with an accountant or someone who really understands your numbers and can really break it down for you to be able to say, is this opportunity, even though it's going to bring in more revenue, is it going to bring in some profit on top of it? Is it going to be worth the extra effort during your busy season?
Right. So a lot of times what happens is, we get this opportunity to work with a large client, and we don't have enough staffing in order to be able to handle that client. So we say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to gear up. We're going to bring in all this staff. We're going to have to train them. We're going to have the cost of their, salaries and their wages. And then at the end of the day, when you run the numbers, you realize that because of all this additional cost of scaling up, that you're actually losing money on this job. So you have to be really careful. You have to understand the impact. Whenever you have new revenue, you're probably going to have new expenses that go with it. So what are those new expenses? How much are they going to be? And will the additional revenue offset those employees? Because typically what happens, especially in small businesses, you hire people and you don't want to let them go. It could be because their stories, their families, and it's heartbreaking to have to let go of an employee. And so we tend to carry employees on longer than we really need them. That's why temporary help is great. Using virtual assistants, doing some outsourcing, hire subcontractors as you need them. But just be careful about bringing people on a permanent basis, because it's really easy to ramp up and grow. It is much more difficult to pull back.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to note, when you have this growth, is it a peak season or is this sustained growth? Because sometimes that happens where your revenue is going to skyrocket for whatever reason. It might be that the economy is really good. It might be that a lot of your customers work for the same company and everybody got bonuses, and it starts to feel like, oh my goodness, it's this new period of growth, right? And a lot of service-based companies see that, people might be hiring landscapers and they might be hiring house cleaners, and all these small businesses are going, my goodness, it's great, it's growth. And then you find out that like it was a temporary thing. Or, wages went up because there was a big contract, and then that big contract goes away and everybody starts to contract. So you just have to be really careful to identify, is this sustained growth or is it just a peak season?
Or sometimes peak seasons can come out of unexpected circumstances. I remember talking to one of our friends who is a landscape designer, and he typically looked forward to recessions because people want less vacations. When people want less vacations, they have a tendency to do more installation and landscaping work in their yards. Now, it's not something that is necessarily always true. However, in general, if you're a landscape designer and you're kind of new at it and it's your first time going through, everyone's talking about the recession, and all of a sudden you're making more money, you might, believe that you can expand out and sustain the growth over a long period of time. That's one of the reasons I think it's important in those kind of industries to use seasonal workers or subcontract it out with other landscapers who are maybe larger to or do that kind of work. You're finding the work and they're performing the work for you, because like I said, you don't want to be in a position where you have to determine, do I lay off 20 people? But if I don't, I'm going to lose my whole business.
Right.
All right. And I think the last thing, and people, I think have a tendency to forget about this, is it's very important to keep motivation high in peak seasons. If you have subcontractors or temporary seasonal employees or other employees and yourself, you need to have a motivated work environment.
Right. And, you just have to make sure that you're keeping up with your self-care. So, one of the planning things that you can do, Jeff and I have a subscription to Massage Envy. And this is something that we do personally, right? They're not like a sponsor of the show or anything like that. But we each get a monthly massage, and we make sure that we book those massages, that you book one before you leave. So that way during peak season, you are continuing, to take care of your body, especially, something like taxes. It gets very tense, and, I'm at the computer a lot. And so going for that massage really helps. Figure out what your self-care regimen is. And we did an episode on self-care. I will link it in the show notes. We also did an episode on energy that I'll link in the show notes. But, make sure that you're getting your sleep. I know it's hard during peak. You have all this work you've got to get done. But if you don't take care of yourself and maintain your health, then you can't survive peak.
And it's part of your job as the business owner to make sure that the people who are working for you, whether they're subcontractors or whether they're employees, either temporary or permanent, you have to keep them motivated, keep them in the game. And however you do that, whether you come up with positive reinforcement kinds of techniques, you play exciting music because, they're loading boxes all day, whatever it is, make sure that you are following up with your people to make sure that they're not going to get into a funk, because if they do, it could affect the output of your products and services.
Yeah. So, before you go into peak, you might want to re-listen to the episode on gratitude. Because I found, when I worked for other people, just hearing thank you and getting appreciated for the work that I did really helped.
Especially when it's busy.
Yes. So, remember to thank your vendors, thank your employees. At this time of year, thank your UPS guy and your mailman and the FedEx guy. Yeah. They're making a lot of trips to our house. I'm ordering things from Amazon, and then by the time they get here 2 days later, I've forgotten I've ordered stuff on Amazon. So, which if you're ordering stuff from Amazon and you want to support the show, you can go to smallbizlife.com/Amazon, and we get a couple pennies for every order that you place.
Yes.
So, but it's thank those people that are interacting with your business. Thank your customers too, because they're helping you, create your dream.
Yep. And if you're in your natural peak, you want them to be your customer next peak as well too. So don't take any piece of it for granted.
Right.
Okay, let's talk for a few moments about how to take advantage of peak season to grow your outreach effort, to grow your mailing list, to grow your social media. What are some simple things that you can do that will allow you to grow in those areas without a lot of effort because you don't have the time to put into it?
So, one thing is that as you are, before your peak, technically begins, it's a really good idea to get some people, do something that's going to generate buzz to get people onto your email list and into your social media. Because if you can grab them before peak, then you have all of peak to try to sell to them.
Yeah. And I think one of the mistakes, especially in people who do very seasonable work, I'm thinking of ice cream companies that have like the little stalls that you go to get ice cream. I'm thinking of guys who do plowing. There's a very limited season for that. What happens is they get your business and then maybe you do or don't remember who they were the next year that comes around. Or the ice cream, there's a couple different places that you could go to the next year. Which one do you go to? If you have a mailing list, if you have social media, you should be upkeeping that and interacting more in your off seasons to try and help keep you in the mind of your customers.
Right. And I think, people do a really good job of this, like when they're launching their business, you kind of do the behind the scenes and this is what we're doing to prepare for opening. But seasonal businesses and businesses with peaks aren't really good at doing this year after year.
You have to relaunch your business essentially for that peak season every year. So you want to start generating that buzz again. And the closer you get, the more you want to do. Maybe you're sending out coupons or incentives through your email newsletter or your social media, so you can incentivize people to start interacting with you again, and hopefully to bring in the business once they come in. Because if you're doing it and your competitors are not, it gives you a huge advantage.
Well, and let's go back to the ice cream. So, if you're gearing up, maybe you're like sprucing up, your location, or you're starting to make the ice cream, give your followers a behind the scenes so that they have something to anticipate on your opening day. Because here's the thing, if you turn off your engagement when you're off season, people aren't going to see that grand opening post unless you pay for it.
Yeah.
Right. Which I'd recommend doing anyways. But, you're going to lose all your organic momentum if you're not keeping up with them during the year.
And one of the worst case scenarios is competition comes about that you didn't even know was starting. And all of a sudden your normal customer flow is going over across town to a different location because they were doing all this stuff because they were launching their business. And now you're going to have a tough year, which obviously would be tougher anyway, because this other business has been outreached and it's the new bright, shiny thing. The more of a relationship you can have year round, the more you can take advantage of that thing. It's tough, but you have to keep this in mind that, especially when you have the time when you're off your season, take advantage of it. I think if you have a place where food is done, showing cleaning the facility is a great thing to do because it shows that you have a clean facility and it shows the effort you put into that. And
or even like, you're painting the outside or you're painting the inside. People love behind the scenes kind of stuff. And so if you're showing people that behind the scenes of your business, it will keep them engaged in their social, in your social, back to the, I like Jeff's idea of the ice cream. If you're developing new flavors, give people, put a poll up on your Facebook page, ask people what flavor do they like, get them engaged in your business. That is so key.
There's a very cool application called King Sumo, I believe. And it is a giveaway software. And essentially the idea of it is the problem with most giveaways are people aren't incentivized to share it out, because the more people who get involved in the giveaway, the less likely they are to win. And so what this software does is it gives them chances to win based off of sharing, based off of joining a newsletter, based off of certain actions that are within your ecosystem. So when you set it up, you can use a system like this. So let's say, 3 people are going to get to sample the new ice cream before the store opens. So, and why am I obsessing with ice cream in the middle of winter? I don't know, but I am.
We might need ice cream.
We might need ice cream. But, it's sit there and put this information out there and say, hey, if you join my newsletter, you get a chance to win. If you join my social media, you get a chance to win. Every time you share it out, you get a chance to win. Make it easy for them to do it, because if you make it easy for them to do it, you give them more chances to win. The more likely to share it out, the more they want the prize.
Right. So, yeah. So King Sumo is actually by the AppSumo folks.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll put a link in the show notes for that as well. But it's a great way to kind of build some momentum, right? You can have a giveaway. The giveaway doesn't have to cost you a lot. Like I said, it could be, a $25 gift card for ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
It could be, an Amazon gift card. It could be that you're giving away your book.
Make it appropriate to your audience, though. Do not make it appropriate. Don't get a 70-inch widescreen TV to give away. You'll get a lot of people probably sharing that out. But what will happen is, are you getting the kinds of people who are sharing it out who actually are going to want to do business with you afterwards? So definitely, if you do a giveaway, make it appropriate to the people you're trying to reach out to, not to the general public.
Right. So if you're a landscaping company, maybe you do a free spring cleanup, or you do 2 weeks of free mowing, something like that will get people sharing it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And, you're going to attract people in your area,
mm-hmm.
right? Because if they're outside your area, then they're probably not going to share it. But it will get to people. You'll grow your email list. You will grow your social following. The great thing with something like King Sumo is that you actually say, okay, if you follow me on Twitter, if you follow us on Facebook, if you join our Facebook group, if you sign up for our email newsletter, and you can say what the parameters are for entry, and then it will automatically pick a winner for you.
Yeah.
So that's pretty neat. I like that.
All right. Now let's take a second to talk about alleviating your peak season. There are a lot of stuff you can do to try and do it, but I think, especially if you have a natural peak season, it's not so important if you have a scheduled one, because you can change the schedule.
Yeah.
You can change the schedule if you need cash at a different time. But if you have a natural peak season, look for ways to diversify your revenue streams, things that sort of either cross over your industry, or maybe you're looking for quiet periods in your industry when they're all revamping up to try and get some sales at that point. Now, there are reasons sometimes that those lulls take place. For example, if you have a huge sale the week after Christmas, it's not going to be a great sale for you. For general retail goods, I should be more specific, but in general, kind of after Christmas, people kind of shut down for almost everything in the U.S.
Actually, that's not true.
Really?
The day after Christmas is one of the biggest shopping days in the country.
Good gosh. Okay, shows how much I know about retail.
Because the shift in retail to gift cards, right? People are getting a tremendous number of gift cards for the holidays. And so they're going out to spend those gift cards, and a lot of retailers have humongous sales the day after Christmas.
Okay.
Sometimes they're actually better than the Black Friday sales. But people now have money in their pockets.
Okay. So this is sort of the opposite of the transportation industry, where it does go to nothing.
Yeah, so the transportation industry goes down. But we're starting to see that that's not even the case, because Amazon's running a lot of deals and people are getting Amazon
trying to get the
cards.
gift card money.
Right. Yeah. So, it's really important to kind of stay up on industry trends, because like I said, the shift to cash for the holidays is creating kind of this pent up demand right after Christmas. And so a lot of people think that's not a good time to launch, but it might actually be a great time to launch, because people now have cash in their pockets or gift cards in their pockets.
Now, the other thing to look at here too is, if you with your existing customer base, are there ways you can incentivize them to act before the season to lock down that money, get the work done and out of the way as much as possible, and leave you time to either grow or do less depending on what your ultimate goal is?
Like I said before, work with your large customers that if you know they're going to put in a big order during your peak season, maybe what you do is you say, listen, give them that discount so that they will bring their order in early. Okay. But those kind of things you have to be really proactive about. So that's why going back in your accounting system, seeing when people are coming in is really key.
Yeah. And also knowing who your big clients are, which you can get from your accounting system, to make sure that you're dealing and giving them the level of customer service that you need to retain those clients. Now, a few quick things to wrap this up, talking about things to watch out for, things to be aware of. And we've covered some of these, but we'll hit them again quickly. Do not assume that just because you're having a good peak season, that will have any effect on your sales next year. Maybe if it's better year to year, maybe you'll get a percentage increase, but one that's knowing your numbers and how they typically react. Maybe you'll get no increase outside of that just because you're hitting that natural cycle and doing a really good job in that cycle does not necessarily give you clients the rest of the year.
Right. And, one thing that I am a huge fan of is I watch the economy. I watch consumer behavior. I watch corporate behavior. So even though, I primarily work with small businesses, it was funny, like right after Thanksgiving, I told Jeff, I'm like, look, I'm watching these different groups and okay, so I'll give you a very specific example. If you're in the Facebook group, you know that I was pushing Instapots on Black Friday because they were on sale. So tons and tons of people bought Instapots, and I'm in their Facebook group. And a lot of people were complaining that their orders were arriving late. And UPS was the company that was delivering them. And I turned to Jeff and I said, UPS is having trouble this year. Orders are already coming in late. Well, last week there was an article, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, talking about how the transportation companies are really struggling, right? And so this is something that I had figured out a couple weeks ago, but the stories weren't going out until last week. So, watching what's going on, we're watching we were at the mall, or we'd driven around the mall. We didn't actually go in the mall, but there was nobody at the mall. And we were kind of like, all right, retail sales probably aren't. And this was like a Friday night and the mall was dead. And then 4 days later, the retail sales numbers come out and they're like, oh, they weren't very good. So, if you can kind of watch what people are doing, right? See if people are spending money, because if people aren't spending money in general, then they're going to be a little bit tighter when you try to push an offer. And so, by understanding consumer behavior and what people are doing and how they're feeling and if they're spending money, I read a lot of business news just to kind of see how people are feeling. Those consumer sentiment surveys, they come out about once a month. Really important to know those numbers. How are people feeling? Because that's going to determine whether or not they're going to spend money.
Yeah. And for example, if you have a business that services retail businesses, if they come out after Christmas and have a really bad season, understand your job is going to be harder, and your peak season that follows it up where you're trying to get the money they made, they're going to have less of it. And you might have to adjust your pricing or the way you pull in customers, because if your customers are having a bad year, you're having a bad year.
Well, and that's, so the big thing I'm going to share with you what I'm watching right now. So the incoming president and the Republicans are saying that they want to go for small business tax cuts. If you work with small businesses right now are very excited about the possibility of this happening. If these tax cuts go through, there's going to be hiring, there's going to be spending because people are going to have more money in their pockets. So watch to see what is happening with these tax bills, because I think it's going to help, if it goes through, then it's great for small business because we're all going to have more money in our pockets. But it's also going to affect spending. Small businesses, because right now, a lot of small business owners feel just like you guys do, right? That you're working really hard, you're paying a lot in taxes, you might not have the money to, hire people or invest in the automation that you want to. I think a lot of small business owners, they don't want to work harder, right? They're looking for ways to kind of pull back and spend more time with their families. And so if these tax cuts go through, I think we're going to see a lot of small business owners start to invest money in those things that are going to save them time. They're either going to be hiring new people or they're going to be looking for solutions to automate. And so that gives you an opportunity to sell to those businesses. And then we're also going to have, if all this hiring happens, we're going to have more consumers that have money in their pockets. So I'm watching this very closely because this is really going to determine how people feel for 2017. And I'm already seeing business owners, it hasn't even happened yet, that are very optimistic about 2017.
All right. One of the other things to look at too are your past seasons. Trying to find one that has very similar dates to the current season will give you the best idea of how your numbers are going to flow. Just working from UPS, I know because the day Christmas falls changes in the day of the week. That sort of would affect when the peak number of packages would come through the facility. And getting that way off could really screw up your plan if you try and hire people as you need them, even if they're contractors, because you might run out of people before you get to them. Or rental trucks. If you're trying to rent during that time, it's very hard to get rental trucks. So understanding an equivalent season is a very important task.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. Like for this year, Thanksgiving was late this year. And so I think a lot of people, they kind of forgot that Christmas was coming. The retail sales numbers for November were not very good. And I think part of that was because Thanksgiving was so late. So people they weren't really thinking about the holidays. And so you can't compare, if you're in retail, it's very hard to compare a year with a late Thanksgiving to the previous year if you had an early Thanksgiving, or compare a year where Christmas this year is on a Sunday to, a year where Christmas is on a Wednesday or a Thursday, because for shipping purposes, that completely shifts your peak day.
Or if it's on best case scenario, a Saturday, because that way you have the full week right before. So it's going to have the latest possible packages will be coming in literally right before Christmas.
Yeah. So, make sure, especially if you're shipping things, the effect that Christmas Day is going to have on your sales, because your cutoff day to guarantee that things are going to be there by Christmas is going to change.
Yep. No, and that's really what we have for you this year for thriving in peak seasons.
So check out the show notes for this episode, because we're going to link a lot of previous episodes in the show notes at smallbizlife.com. So that way, there may be some episodes that you might want to go back to that that we touched upon a little bit, but maybe we didn't, dive in because we've already talked about that before. So I hope if you're, in your peak season, that it is wrapping up well. If you were gearing up for your peak season, I hope that it goes smoothly for you. And if you don't have a peak season or you're not sure, reach out to us in the Small Biz Life community. We can help you out with that. And that is facebook.com/groups/smallbizlife. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time. And hey, hit the subscribe button. Thank you for listening to Small Biz Life. If you enjoyed the show, please take a few minutes to rate and review the show on iTunes or Stitcher. Please visit smallbizlife.com to view today's show notes, take this week's poll, join the Facebook community, follow us on Twitter, or submit a question for the mailbag. Support the show by checking the resources page or by going to smallbizlife.com/Amazon whenever you shop.
This was Small Biz Life.